Hello, my name is Joe van Dijk and welcome to my podcast. You're watching Screenplay Essentials and this is episode 5, part 2. We're talking about the Golden Diamond and I decided to split the content into the second part, which I'll be going to empathy and likability. Otherwise, the first episode would have been a 2-hour long video and hopefully we can continue this conversation. So let's jump in. Okay, so next up, empathy. Empathy is probably the most important component of the 4. It's literally the ability to understand and the feelings of another person, the ability to cooperate, collaborate, and to see someone else's perspective on any given subject. Empathy is the bridge between the audience and the character. It allows the audience to be seen, to be heard, to feel what's going on. And without that bridge, the story is very stale and flat and you don't connect your audience with your character. Empathy is a universal human condition that everyone around the world understand. It's a pivotal role in interacting with other human beings, with communication, with strengthening relationships. It's an ability to understand what the other person is feeling. And implementing empathy into your story allows your audience to connect with your character's motivation. Empathy is often introduced either in the first act, second act, or the third act. Most of the times it's implemented in the first act so that the audience can immediately understand what the character is going through. But other films and other writers have implemented empathy later on in the story to reveal a more or a deeper significance. Maybe the story had a couple of red herrings or distractions or plot reversals. Empathy will then be introduced to hone the audience and bring the audience back to the focus of what the story is really about. In psychology, there are 3 types of empathy conditions. The first one, cognitive empathy, is empathy by thought. We get to see and understand someone else's perspective on a given subject or matter. Then emotional empathy is by giving characters emotion and eliciting emotion through the characters' actions and in the scenes. The audience gets to latch on to those emotions and connect with those emotions. Then the third one is compassionate empathy, which is the strongest one of the 3, which combines an affective state of compassion, which is essentially signifies the sympathy of the plight of others, and the emotional state, empathy, which focuses on the feelings and experiences and emotions by others. I found an article that basically described 9 habits that empathy often introduces to children on how children understand empathy. And it's not so much a teaching subject for children, but you can go through this list from Michele Borba and see how films, for each of these categories, there's a lot of films that has dealt with empathy in these matters. And it's a really good, handy tool to, if you're struggling with empathy, to see what you can implement in your own story with regards to these habits. Now, Michael Hauge also famously put forward a few components or a checklist that you can ask your characters when trying to strengthening empathy in your story. The thing that you can ask for your protagonist is what is your protagonist's flaws, and do they have relatable flaws that the audience can connect with? What are their weaknesses? It's very important to implement flaws into your character and as opposed to presenting them as these perfect human beings, because often it's the case when a character is perfect or shown perfect, the audience distance themselves from that. Or when you show a character with that perfect nature, that hopefully you have built in something deeper and darker behind that armor, because often it's the case when a character shows that perfect nature, it's the armor that they show to the world. Is your protagonist being treated unjustly, unfairly? Is there misfortune, or is there just bad consequences or bad circumstances that they find themselves? That will often generate empathy with the audience. Another thing that you can do is make your protagonist particularly good at something, at the skill very uniquely, and also show if they have any sort of perseverance or endurance. Maybe they've got a threshold for pain, or maybe they can't handle pain. Then also, how does your protagonist show positive traits or values? Loyalty, love, honor, the sense of duty. Those things can also effectively introduce empathy in your story. Another good way is to show how your protagonist treats other people, How do they see the connections with friends and family, and how do they see their neighbors? How do they treat strangers or all their enemies? How do they treat animals and pets? That can also be an effective way to introduce empathy. Be careful not to be on the nose with those things when you show a character just petting a dog for no reason. You often see this in movies, especially Hollywood movies, where a character goes out of their way to save a cat. Those things are often very on the nose, and my writer's brain often tells me that the writer is taking a shortcut by showing us a random act of generosity or like saving a cat out of a tree for no reason other than to show, oh, the character cares for pets. Just be careful about those on the nose things, and it doesn't mean your protagonist can't help other people. The act of showing humility or generosity can be effective in establishing empathy. Then also, very importantly, how does the other characters view your character? If other characters are hateful and treat your character really badly, then the audience will have empathy for your protagonist. It's very important to see how other characters view your character, especially when there are secondary characters that has conflict that is outside the scope of the protagonist and the antagonist, like external conflict that secondaries are dealing with. How does the protagonist deal with that? Does the protagonist help create peace, or does the protagonist offer solutions? What is the relationship between the character in their ordinary world, in the extraordinary world, and how they assist other people and how other people view them? It's very importantly to establish that sort of empathy in your story. What works for you? You definitely don't need to force all these things on your story. Maybe there's one of these things specifically that can help strengthening empathy in your story, that can assist you. Better Call Saul beautifully shows this sort of empathy between two brothers when the audience can clearly understand the relationship between Saul and his brother. I think his name was Chuck. When Chuck is shown with his mental disability in how he withdraws from society and puts essentially a cage around himself, you understand that, and you feel sorry for the person, and you can see how Saul is going above and beyond to help his brother. There's also a sense of his brother has empathy for Saul and helping him wherever he can, but it still have that strict reprimanding nature of an older brother. You see the empathy beautifully constructed throughout that story. And often empathy forms the premise of the entire story. If you think about all the way back to Charlie Chaplin and the kid, where the tramp finds the kid and the child on the streets, and the empathy he has for that kid forms that relationship, and he does whatever he can to protect that kid and that innocence. A film like Hotel Rwanda shows this as well, where the main character has empathy for the people in that village or that town, and literally because of that empathy saves their lives. Another example can be seen in the movie Passengers, where an accident befalls the main character in this starship, and he takes the decision to wake up another character so that he doesn't end up being alone. And that empathy transforms into an unlikable component because the audience knows that his action is going to backfire on this character. But luckily how the movie ends is how these two characters, this love story comes together and form this life together. The scenes will often be about the character trying to achieve their super objective. When you weave in empathy, it's very important to have that come in naturally so that the audience understand what's going on and can root for your character and go along with their character motivations and understand what they're trying to achieve. Lastly, likability. So likability often has this weird misconception among writers or storytellers that people often think likability means you need to create very friendly, kind, positive, bubbly, enthusiastic type of personalities. And often it's the case that the opposite is true. And it's not about creating morally perfect characters. They're often shown going through hardships and despair. And when you have a character that's this perfect human being, the audience often distance themselves from relating to those characters. They can become bland, boring, predictable. People often root for the characters who struggle the most, and especially if your characters have flaws. Breaking Bad is a fantastic example of a likable and unlikable character, where Walter White is a very likable character. When everyone started watching the show, everyone fell in love with Walter White in his pursuit to be financial, secure with his cancer treatments. There's empathy within that, so that we understand where the character is coming from, and the fact that he is willing to get his hands dirty with the underworld and the crime, with the drug dealing and his day-to-day doings with Jesse. Then what happens is that the wife, very famously, is a very unlikable character, written that way, played by a fantastic actor. She comes off as a very unlikable character. Now, interesting thing that happens when you rewatch the story maybe 3 or 4 times, you realize that this perfect, morally correct character, Skyler, becomes likable over time, and you realize that Walter, being a very selfish and evil character, is constantly seen throughout. Not that he loses his likability, but you see how perspectives can change with regards to characters. First, Skyler was a likable character, and she becomes a likable character when the audience rewatches the series. Now, likability is essential for the audience to care for your character, and it helps the audience to be fully invested in the character story and to continue watching the story. Much like a reader reading a book, to turn the next page, that is the essence of what the audience wants, the reaction of the audience regards to your story and your character. Likability has more to do with your audience reaction than the character and the character's personality. Likability is specifically designed to engage your story with the audience. And likability is our way to root for your character and to like their demeanor, their behavior, their personalities, things that they do, how they interact with other people is a very important component to consider when writing your own unique story, your own unique premise. And you can see characters on screen who are very likable. They are often very miserable in the story. If you think about a character in most of the films and series that you've watched, they're often consumed by the conflict that they're trying to solve, or the burdens of the pressure of other people around them. The world is often in a spiral of madness and it's misery and despair. But the cool thing is that how their coping strategies and their coping mechanisms often show us how we can relate to them and what makes them likable. When you have a story with gangsters as the main characters, they are obviously immoral type of characters who likes killing people or likes to do crime. The Goodfellas are a prime example of this, where you see the characters, how they interact with one another, and there's a bit of a hierarchy process as well, initiation process of the main character in the life of crime. If you think about like an assassin who gets distracted by something silly, or he botches the job by doing something stupid, or tries to hide the body, but the entire world now is like on his case. A very famous saying is, when a character tries to hide a body, that how life works, all the unexpected things occur. When a character tries to obtain privacy, everyone comes out of the woodwork, from the cat and the dog and the lady down the street. Everyone comes out to make it difficult for a character to hide a body. Nightcrawler is a beautiful example of an immoral character, but he is likable in the story. And I won't go in much detail of this, but I'll put a link in the description so that you can follow. It's a very clever case study of what someone else did, and I would like to direct your attention to that episode when you have a chance to view Nightcrawler as a case study. And the guy talks about likability, managing or writing likability for characters like that. Humor is an effective way to establish likability in your character, but it's not the only tool. When a character is fighting an uphill battle, the audience will like that character. Characters who are loyal or have honor, those things automatically produce likability. People like rooting for the underdog. If a character is trying to discover the truth, or a character is exposing the truth, those things will often produce likability automatically in the audience. So there's a few things. It's not just about humor. There's a few other things that can help, even with a sympathetic backstory, can produce a likability feature in the main character. And don't forget, it's not just the main character, the protagonist, that has likability components. You can also make likable antagonists and likable villains. People like Darth Vader, people like villains like Thanos. They gravitate towards those types of antagonists, and there's a very good reason why everyone gravitates towards the Batman movies with Joker being a very likable villain, because he wants to see the world burn, and you see the character making a lot of silly mistakes. The thing that makes antagonists so likable is the fact that they establish conflict very real. They make conflict very real. And even if you think about characters like Joffrey or the Bolton character from Game of Thrones, they are very despicable characters, but what makes them so likable in a sense that they make the conflict so real, and you root for the good guy to win the story because they are so evil and they're so bad at what they represent, that it's so much more pleasure when the good guy actually wins the battle. Very important thing to remember is when dealing with antagonists is not to make a joke of them. When you make a joke of antagonists, you deflate the conflict. Unless you're dealing with a comedy genre where you specifically design it in such a way, for example, Dr. Evil from the Austin Powers franchise. When you create those characters and you specifically design them to be the butt of the joke. But generally speaking, when you're dealing with drama or fantasy or normal character-driven story, that you should never make fun of your antagonist, because when you do, you cripple the antagonist. And what often happens with the audience is they will ask, but why isn't your main character seeing what we are seeing? If we are seeing the antagonist falls over their feet, why isn't your main character also seeing this? And why isn't your main character taking advantage of the situation? It often shows the IQ of characters when the audience sees something that's common sense that the main characters struggle to see. You then expose the writing of the story when you make fun of an antagonist or you deflate the conflict, because the goal of antagonist is to focus the conflict of your story. It's also important to understand the opposite of likability, which makes characters unlikable. When characters are wimpy or a snitch or complains a lot or nosy, those type of characteristics, those negative traits, can help make a character unlikable. And be careful when you implement ideology or real world ideology or identity politics into your characters, because when you have like a female character that is this perfect human being, the character has no flaws, they're just this perfect entity that can solve all crises. People can't relate to those type of characters because it's often fake or cartoonish. When you create characters with flaws and mistakes, people relate to them, and people like characters going through mistakes that we can connect with and understand how they're dealing with those conflicts. Now, Michael Hauge also put forth a sort of a checklist to help you strengthening likability, or if you have difficulty introducing likability into your story, you can look at this list and ask your characters questions. For example, show that your protagonists have flaws and weaknesses and vulnerabilities that the audience can relate to. Very importantly, show that your character has conviction in moving the plot forward. There's a sense of urgency that they have a goal and they're trying to reach that goal. If you're telling a story with a passive character with no desire to move the story forward in obtaining what they're trying to obtain, you create a very stale and flat, boring, and people zone out of those type of characters. They become unlikable. Likability is often rooted in just the fact that you are watching a character obsessed about the thing that they're trying to achieve, whether through their desire and through their goal that they set, the super objective that they're trying to achieve. Now, there's also, like I've mentioned, automatic likability that gets produced when you have characters that are loyal, that are honest, that speak the truth. Characters who are that has a sense of duty or responsibility in exposing the someone that's evil, rooting for the underdog, characters who help other characters in need. When you have characters that suffers from sort of this disability or social disadvantage, a character that's in a poor class that is fighting for survival, those things automatically will produce likability. Make sure that your protagonist's positive traits outweigh the negative traits. Even if it's a story where the character goes through hell and despair and misery, you still need to make them likable to the audience in one way or another. Having a character that only showcases negative traits will make them unlikable. So remember that if you have characters with, if you have a character that has positive traits, that they are not being buried by negative things. And show your character how they deal with the conflict, how they adapt to new situations. And very importantly, how other characters view your character can also reflect with regards to likability. And also how your character treats other people. Show somewhere in your story where your character smiles. Writers often forget that when dealing with conflict and things that you implement in the story, making your character miserable and making them have mistakes and flaws, they often forget that you need moments where the character just smiles. And when the audience sees a character smile, they understand that, oh, this person is human. You can also show a character how they communicate and treat children or elderly people and even pets. Just be careful with pets and animals, because often when I see a movie when a character goes out of their way to pet a dog or to rescue a cat out of a tree or to save a cat or whatever those silly things are, it often tells me the writer is taking a shortcut to push it in front of me, like on the nose. My character is likable because he's petting a dog. Sometimes it can work for your characters. For example, if you want to show a character is unlikable, have the character drive over a dog. There's a 1950s movie, Desperate Hours, where we have three brothers who's taking a family hostage, and one of the brothers is very psychotic type of nature or personality. There's even a moment where the second brother goes out of his way to go and kill the delivery man with regard to suspicion, and he's seen driving with the delivery man, and there's a dog in the middle of the road, and he purposely yanks the wheel and drives over the dog for the sakes of just amusement. That sort of thing paints the character as a very unlikable psychopath. And then the younger brother, who is also a criminal, but he's a likable secondary, which he's trapped in the situation, and he actually tries to negotiate and tries to get the older brother to let go of this family because they are sitting ducks. Then you've got the father figure who's playing the protection role in doing what these criminals want so that he can protect his family, and he's shown with that bravery of protecting his wife and his daughter and his little boy. Antagonists can also have a cool factor that you can heighten, but just be careful that it doesn't become too cheesy. If you think about characters like Hannibal Lecter, the reason why they're cool because they have ability to draw in the protagonist into their own chaos, their ability to manipulate the situation in having the protagonist playing their game. The same with like the character from the Die Hard, the third Die Hard movie, that Simon Says he's playing that silly role to make the character likable in how he's tormenting John McClane. Another example of likable antagonist is shown through their rude behavior. They're obnoxious, free-minded, free-spirited, can be unconscientious in their situation. So in this detective story, it's a drama set piece in which takes place in one location. The main character is dealing with these multiple different petty crimes, street criminals act out like children. These unfortunate souls causes havoc in this police station. With regard to the main character, he starts off as an unlikable police officer because he's very, very strict. He wants to lay down the law and has zero mercy for anyone who does something small. And the main character refuses to pardon this character, and he is very strict, and there's a specific reason why he does that to that character. And then you see the character slowly morphs into a likable character as he is trying to to restore order in this police station. Michael Scott's character is very famously, iconically, with regards to likability and unlikability. When the American version of The Office started, everyone hated the character because he reminds us of this childish type of Arrested Development adult that still is very insecure about himself and other people and makes other people uncomfortable. So he started off as an unlikable character, but there's a certain point in the story, maybe in the second or third season, where it completely shifts, where the audience understands what's happening with Michael Scott and why is Michael the way he is. And because of that, they immediately fall in love with his character. And not because only he's doing silly things that are humorous, but you understand why the character is what he is, and that likability component works so beautifully. Where Dwight is oblivious about his own stupidity, and he falls for the gags, and he does stupid things and says stupid things, and Dwight is more likable than Angela, for example. Angela is a very unlikable character because she is very stubborn and strict within her own. She builds a wall around her and everyone needs to play by her rules. That makes that character unlikable. If you think about Bruce Campbell's character in the Evil Dead series, he's got this Looney Tunes type of cool factor surrounding him, how he deals with this absurd chaos that he finds himself in. It's a bit of a comedy horror, but that cool factor makes that character likable. Characters also fight for the things that they work hard for. If you think about There Will Be Blood, that father figure in the story, the main character, is a very strict type of personality, and you wouldn't think it's someone that you can root for. But when you see the struggles and when you understand where the character's coming from and how he's trying to fight for the things that he's fighting for, you do like the character, and especially in contrast with the pastor figure that is trying to corner him in whatever the situation is that the conflict that they're trying to resolve. The Boys series shows this beautifully as well, where you've got likable vigilantes, which are normal human beings, versus superheroes that are actually unlikable. And the Antihero, which is our main characters, that is very likable in what they're doing and how they're trying to solve the conflict with these superheroes. Especially Homelander, that's a psychopath, which is in a sense a likable antagonist. So concluding the Golden Diamond with part 1 and part 2, hopefully this all makes sense in the effort that you need to implement these basic components into your own story. You can watch so many films in cinema history, throughout cinema history, and foreign films and international films where these basic components are implemented in their stories. Hopefully I've covered some great examples explaining these things, that there's 1,000 films I can reference or could reference, but hopefully the ones that I've explained shed some light on these fundamental components that you can implement into your story. If you struggle with fear, empathy, likability, desire, figuring out how you can implement those things into your story and your characters, there are many articles online, and I'll put a few links in the description that you can follow, things that can help you just to get like a launching pad for your own unique story, your own unique premise. You are the chef of your own dish that you're creating, and it's up to you how you implement these things into your story. This episode essentially concludes the whole character development process, but I've decided to, the next few episodes, probably 3 or 4 episodes to conclude the series, I've decided to do maybe like a case study for how you develop characters over a trilogy, how you develop characters in a few specific movies or animations, and also character development over video games that I have a special interest in. But the next episode I'll be talking about conflict, and I've decided to implement this into the first series as well, because conflict forms the basis, the foundations of storytelling, and I will delve into that as well. So thanks for watching. Please like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next episode.